Subscribe now for more stories like this. The legend of the Whispering Oak had long been told in the quiet village of Briarwood. It stood at the edge of the forest, towering above all other trees, its branches stretching out like an old guardian. But this was no ordinary tree. It was said that the oak could speak. Some claimed it whispered secrets to those who dared to stand beneath it on a moonless night, though no one could say for certain what those whispers revealed. Many called it myth, others folklore. But no one dared test it. No one, until Nora came along. Nora was a curious soul, never content with old wives' tales or the superstitions that ran deep in her village. She'd heard the stories about the oak ever since she was a child. Yet every time she asked, her mother would warn her never to go near it. "It knows things," her mother would say in a hushed voice, "things no one should ever know." But now, standing on the edge of the forest on a cool autumn evening, Nora found herself drawn to the ancient tree. The wind whistled softly through the leaves, and the setting sun cast long shadows, but it wasn't fear that coursed through her, it was wonder. What could this tree possibly whisper? What secrets did it hold? Her feet moved forward on their own accord, carrying her deeper into the woods, closer to the oak. As the village houses disappeared behind her, an eerie silence fell over the forest. No birds sang. No crickets chirped. Only the occasional rustle of leaves under her feet broke the quiet. The oak loomed ahead, its gnarled bark twisted with age, its roots pushing up through the earth like ancient veins. Nora hesitated at the base of the tree, looking up into its sprawling canopy. The branches seemed to stretch infinitely upward, and the sky had turned a deep, velvety purple. She could feel the weight of the tree's presence, like it was watching her, waiting. With a deep breath, Nora placed her hand on the bark. It felt warm, almost alive, pulsing beneath her fingertips. She waited, heart pounding in her chest. At first, there was nothing. No whispers, no eerie voices. Then, just as she was about to laugh off the legend, she heard it, a soft murmur, almost indistinguishable from the wind. The voice seemed to seep out from the very heart of the oak, and it was calling her name. "Nora." She jerked her hand back, her eyes widening. The voice was so faint, so fragile, that she almost doubted whether she'd heard it at all. "Nora." It whispered again, more insistent this time. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I know you." The oak's voice replied, low and hoarse, like 100 voices speaking at once. "I know everything." Nora's blood ran cold, but curiosity outweighed her fear. "What do you know?" she demanded, her voice shaking but determined. There was a long silence, and just as Nora thought the whispers might fade away, the oak spoke again, softer this time, as if confiding a secret. "Your father, he didn't leave." Nora froze. She had grown up believing her father had abandoned her and her mother when she was just a baby. It had always been a wound in her heart, a mystery that haunted her. But now the oak was saying something else. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her throat tight. "What happened to him?" The tree's branches groaned as if shifting under the weight of centuries-old memories. "He came here. He sought the truth. Just as you do now. And the oak, it took him." Nora's heart raced, her breath quickening. "Took him? What does that mean? Where is he?" The air around her grew thick, and the tree seemed to pulse with life. The roots at her feet began to twist and move, curling like fingers through the earth. "He is here, Nora. He is part of the oak. He became one with it." Subscribe now for more stories like this. Her mind reeled. It couldn't be true, this was just a tree, an ancient tree. But as she looked closer, something caught her eye. The bark, just beneath the surface, held faint lines, like the outline of a face, her father's face. She stumbled back, her hand covering her mouth. "No, that can't be," she gasped. "You're lying." The oak creaked, its branches swaying gently, the whispering growing louder, more insistent. "He came seeking knowledge. He wanted to know too much. He asked for things no one should ever ask for. And now, he will forever remain here, feeding the tree. Tears welled in Nora's eyes. She couldn't breathe. Her father, the man she had never known, was right here. Trapped within this ancient tree. You came seeking answers, the oak's voice rasped. But some truths come at a price. The roots at her feet suddenly shot upward, wrapping around her ankles. She screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the forest. She pulled and struggled, but the oak's grip tightened, dragging her down toward the earth. You will join him, the whispers said softly. You will be part of the oak, just like him. As the roots pulled her into the soil, Nora's mind raced. She had wanted to know the truth, but she had never expected this. Her last thought before the earth swallowed her whole was that perhaps some secrets were meant to remain buried, and as the forest grew still once more. The oak stood tall and silent, its secret safely kept for another day. Nora was gone, her cries silenced by the thick soil that covered her. The forest returned to its quiet slumber, and the whispering oak stood as it always had, ancient and unyielding. For weeks, no one in the village noticed her absence. She had always been a bit of a loner, prone to wandering and getting lost in her own thoughts. But one person did notice, Mrs. Winthrop, the village elder who had lived for nearly a century and had seen many strange things in her time. She had warned Nora's mother, years ago, about the dangers of the oak, just as she had warned many others. Few listened. Mrs. Winthrop shuffled through the village one misty morning, her cane tapping against the cobblestone streets. She reached the market square and paused when she overheard two villagers speaking in hushed tones. "Have you seen that girl, Nora?" One man asked, his voice laced with concern. "No," the other replied. "Not for weeks now. Her mother said she went wandering in the woods again." "The woods?" The man's voice lowered. "You don't think she went near the oak?" Mrs. Winthrop's heart tightened in her chest. She had a terrible feeling she knew exactly what had happened to Nora. The oak always took the curious, the ones who asked too many questions. She had seen it before long ago, when she was a young girl herself. Later that day, she made her way to the edge of the forest, her gnarled hands gripping her cane tightly. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. The forest was unnervingly still. As she stood before the whispering oak, she felt a chill creep up her spine. The tree was silent, just as it always was when it had taken another soul. Mrs. Winthrop gazed up at the great oak, her eyes narrowing. "I know what you've done," she whispered, her voice low and cracked with age. "And you know who I am." For a moment, the tree remained still, as if listening. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, its branches swayed. A faint whisper drifted through the air, but it was so soft that only Mrs. Winthrop could hear it. "Nora." The old woman's heart clenched, but she remained firm. "I won't let you keep her," she muttered, stepping closer to the tree. Her cane sank into the soft earth at the base of the oak, and she glared up at its twisted branches. "You've taken too many. It ends here." She reached into the folds of her cloak and pulled out a small, weathered book. It was a tome of ancient knowledge, one she had carried with her for decades, waiting for the day when she would need it. Inside were the secrets of the forest, the words needed to break the oak's curse. Her fingers traced the faded pages, and she began to mutter the old incantation. As the words left her lips, the air around her began to hum with energy. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the tree's branches shook violently. The oak groaned, as if in pain, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. It was fighting back, but Mrs. Winthrop was relentless. Her voice grew stronger as she chanted, her words slicing through the air like a blade. The roots at the base of the tree began to writhe and twist, pulling away from the earth as if they were being forced out. The tree's bark cracked, and from deep within its trunk, a low moan echoed through the forest. Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light, and the ground shook violently, knocking Mrs. Winthrop off her feet. She hit the earth hard, her breath knocked out of her. But she didn't stop chanting. She knew she couldn't. As the light faded, a figure began to emerge from the base of the tree, no longer wood, but flesh. It was Nora. The young woman stumbled forward, her face pale and her clothes dirty, but she was alive. Mrs. Winthrop's heart swelled with relief, but she knew it wasn't over yet. The oak still held power, and it would not give up easily. Nora looked around in confusion, her eyes wide with fear. What happened? She gasped, her voice trembling. The tree, it whispered to me. It told me things. Horrible things. Mrs. Winthrop struggled to her feet, her old bones aching, but there was no time for rest. You're safe now, child. But we must finish this. The oak's branches thrashed violently, and the whispers turned to a roar. The ground beneath them began to split, and dark shadows poured out from the cracks like smoke. It's not over. Nora cried, backing away from the tree. It's still trying to pull us in. Mrs. Winthrop grabbed Nora's arm and pulled her close. Listen to me, she said firmly. You must finish the incantation. You must be the one to end this. Nora's eyes widened in shock. But I don't know how. I can't. Yes, you can, Mrs. Winthrop interrupted, her voice strong and unwavering. The oak took your father. It almost took you. You have the strength to break its curse. Nora hesitated, but deep down, she knew the old woman was right. She had always felt a strange connection to the tree, a pull she couldn't explain. Now, she understood why. With trembling hands, Nora took the book from Mrs. Winthrop and began to read the incantation aloud. Her voice was shaky at first, but as she continued, it grew stronger. The tree's thrashing slowed, and the shadows began to retreat. The ground stopped shaking, and the whispers faded into silence. As the last word of the incantation left Nora's lips, the oak let out one final, mournful groan. Its branches sagged, and the bark began to crumble away. Within moments, the great tree that had stood for centuries was reduced to nothing but dust. Nora collapsed to the ground, tears streaming down her face. It was over. The oak was gone, and with it, the curse that had haunted her family for so long. Mrs. Winthrop knelt beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. You did it, she whispered. You broke the curse. Nora looked up at the old woman, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. Mrs. Winthrop smiled faintly, her old eyes twinkling with wisdom. The oak is gone, my child. Subscribe now for more stories like this.